I've seen hatred for political reasons, specifically on June 14th, 2017, at a ball field in Virginia. And I've seen hatred in war. And I know that hatred blinds people. I've been in war, and I've studied war. And coups create division. And it's time for this phase of the publicly announced and proclaimed Democrat coup to end. Thank you for your service. Thanks for being here, and I yield back.
Could I actually say something? Because we've had three.
Doctor, I was going to ask you if you'd like to respond. There have been a number. Gentleman suspended. Dr. Hill, you may respond.
No, I think that what Dr. Wenstrup said was very powerful about the importance of overcoming hatred and certainly partisan division. And it's unfortunate that Congressman Turner and Ratcliffe have both left as well. Because I think all of us who came here under a legal obligation also felt we had a moral obligation to do so. We came as fact witnesses. I don't believe that there should be any interference of any kind in our election. And I know that this has put a huge cloud over this presidency and also over our whole democratic system. That's actually why, as a non-partisan person and as an expert on Russia and an expert on Vladimir Putin and on the Russian security services, I wanted to come in to serve the country to try to see if I could help. I heard President Trump say that he wanted to improve the relations with Russia. I believe we have to. We can't be in this unending confrontation with Russia. We have to find a way to stabilize that relationship and to professionalize that relationship, as well as to stop them from doing what they did in 2016 again in 2020. We're here to relate to you what we heard, what we saw, and what we did, and to be of some help to all of you in really making a very momentous decision here. We are not the people who make that decision. And I do, again, want to underscore what you said here, Dr. Wenstrup. It was very eloquent and very moving about your service and trying to bring us all together again as Americans. We need to be together again in 2020 so the American people can make a choice about the future and about make their vote in a presidential election without any fear that this is being interfered in from any quarter whatsoever. So I just want to thank you for making what I think was also a very elegant and eloquent and heartfelt defense.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. Ms. Spear.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Dr. Hill, Mr. Holmes, thank you both for being fact witnesses. We are here as fact finders, and we appreciate very much your presentations. Dr. Hill, I want to verify this story. I understand that when you were 11 years old, there was a schoolboy who set your pigtails on fire, and you were taking a test. You turned around and with your hands snuffed out the fire and then proceeded to finish your test. Is that a true story?
It is a true story. I was a bit surprised to see that pop up today. It's one of the stories I occasionally tell because it had some very unfortunate consequences. Afterwards, my mother gave me a bowl haircut. So for the school photograph later in that week, I look like Richard III, or as if I'm going to be in a permanent...
Well, I think it underscores the fact that you speak truth, that you are steely, and I truly respect that.
This whole hearing turned on a dime when the president tweeted about her real time. During the questioning, Adam Schiff stopped the Democratic questioning to read the president's tweet to her and get her response. Now that enabled Schiff to then characterize that tweet as intimidating the witness or tampering with the witness, which is a crime, adding essentially an article of impeachment real time as this hearing is going on. That changed this entire dynamic of this first part of this hearing. And Republicans now are going to have to take the rest of this hearing to probably try to clean that up.
Well, I must say that the president was not advised by counsel in deciding to do this tweet. Extraordinarily poor judgment. The president frequently says, I follow my instincts. Sometimes we have to control our instincts. So obviously this was, I think, quite injurious. I don't think it rises to the level of intimidation, but that's of a witness. But I think that's the way it's going to be characterized.
I think that if you are not moved, and we'll have to wait and see what happens in the cross-examination, but if you are not moved by the testimony of Marie Ivanovich today, you don't have a pulse. This is a woman who had served in 7 posts for presidents of both parties over more than 30 years, hardship posts, places like Somalia, like Tashkent, and she tells a story of being a leading fighter against corruption in Ukraine and being called out of a meeting that was an event at the U.S. Embassy that was to honor an anti-corruption fighter who was later killed because acid was thrown into that woman's face, and she's being told by the Secretary General at the State Department, you're going to have to leave, and you're going to have to leave on the next plane, and we're worried about your security, not your physical security, but obviously our ability to protect you and your reputation and your standing there.
Something else that was said by Adam Schiff, the chair of the Intelligence Committee, he indicated that this might be an attempt to intimidate the witness. Now, when we look at the U.S. Constitution and we look at Article 2, Section 4, it doesn't say anything about witness intimidation. You know, it talks about high crimes and misdemeanors, bribery, which is a theme we've heard a lot about here. But you could see potentially that Democrats could use that moment to try to tie that into an article of impeachment.
The main takeaway from the call was the president doesn't care about Ukraine. So we're going to have a tough road ahead to convince him that it's important enough for him to schedule an Oval Office meeting for President Zelensky and ultimately to release this hold on security assistance. That was the takeaway. We were trying to find a formula, things we could do with the Ukrainians that would convince the president that they were worth talking to.
Maybe Mr. Holmes, the takeaway was he thought it was no big deal because he already knew. He didn't remember it because we already had the transcript.
No,
he didn't remember the we had the Trump-Zelensky transcript had been out for 2 months.
Sir, I believe that
even though you're repeatedly bringing this conversation up, as you said, to everybody anytime there's a talk about Ukraine, you recall this conversation. Maybe it was the transcript. The call happened on the July 25th. That's 4 months ago. The transcript's been out for 2 months. Maybe the ambassador thought this is nothing new here. But shazam, last week you come forward with supposedly this new information. There is nothing different in there than what we had on the transcript. Maybe that's the reason their star witness, their first witness, didn't bring it up. But they had to have something. So you're their closing witness because you overheard the president talking to Ambassador Sondland.
Sir, if I could answer, I see 4 seconds left on the clock. I believe that
Mr. Holmes, you may take as long as you need.
Thank you, sir. I believe that Ambassador Taylor did already know when I briefed him when I returned from vacation on the 6th. It was not news to him that the president was pressing for a Biden investigation.
That's not what I asked. I asked why he didn't share with us.
Mr. Jordan, please do not interrupt the witness any further. Mr. Holmes,
this is exactly
Mr. Jordan's time has expired, but yours has not.
Okay, thank you, sir.
You may answer the question.
It's exactly my point. I briefed the call in detail to the Deputy Chief of Mission, went away for a week, come back, I refer to the call, and everyone is nodding. Of course that's what's going on. Of course the president is pressing for a Biden investigation before he'll do these things the Ukrainians want. There was nodding agreement. So did I go through every single word in the call? No, because everyone by that point agreed. It was obvious what the president was pressing for. And Ambassador Taylor, as you've just outlined, had all those other interactions with all these other
But he didn't share it with us.
Mr. Jordan, please do not interrupt.
But sir, sir, my vivid recollection of an event I was involved with was a touchstone experience that to me validated
and
what, sir,
Mr. Jordan, please
what we believed. And Ambassador Taylor was not in that call.
And so all of a sudden last week, you got to come tell us, right?
Mr. Jordan,
your boss
we will allow the witness to answer the question.
I'll finish with this.
Thank you.
He was involved in a number of other interactions, as you've outlined, that brought him to the same conclusion. It is quite possible that
he doesn't share the one that the guy he worked with.
Mr. Jordan,
Mr.
Jordan, you may not like the witness's answer, but we will hear it.
There wasn't an answer.
Mr. Jordan, we will hear the witness's answer.
So is there anything that you think that Donald Trump could do that would warrant impeachment or remove from office?
High crimes and misdemeanors.
Sure.
Bribery or treason. Those things
So you don't
exist.
think exploiting military aid?
I don't think that he exploited military aid. Again,
Really?
you keep asserting these premises that aren't true.
So you're going to have the president's back no matter what?
That's not true.
I think you made that pretty clear, right?
No. You again.
Because I think
viewpoint
the
onto
concern
personal lines, it's not my
of me and fellow veterans is that we both swore the same oath. If you're not willing to hold Trump accountable to his oath of office, then you are betraying yours.
Well, I disagree with your characterization that he has betrayed his oath or that I've betrayed mine, but that's why we've got this great country where people get to
Absolutely, freedom of speech, like us having this conversation here, yeah.
If democracy is sacred, and Trump has multiple times,
Hold on, I take exception with the premise of the question. But if it's super important, but not necessarily sacred.
Oh, so democracy is not sacred.
Well, sacred implies something regarding like God and faith. I think it's
Didn't Donald Trump, in releasing the transcript, already admit to
no, the transcript
bribery?
doesn't show any conditionality.
Do me a favor, though. It doesn't show any conditionality. No. So here's the thing. I think veterans around the country are kind of sick of this line, of inauthenticity coming from folks like you.
It's very authentic.
Because if you're not
how do you
willing,
know what my authenticity is, right? You sit here.
it's a good question. How would I know?
I think it's very clear that he is using our foreign policy for personal gain, and that's not the role of the president. Well, the fact that he used military aid to try and extract a favor from a foreign government to interfere in our election, well, it's still if you try to commit a crime and you don't, you're still tried, and that still counts to me, sir. That's what I learned in the Marine Corps. If you share your perspective, I want to have a genuine conversation. So if you really want to have a genuine conversation, all we can ask is that you follow the facts and that you put, partisan interests aside, because this is about not just this president, it's about every president that comes after.
So you're going to have the president's back no matter what?
That's not true.
I think you made that pretty clear, right?
No. Again,
because I think the concern of me and fellow veterans is that we both swore the same oath. If you're not willing to hold Trump accountable to his oath of office, then you are betraying yours.
Well, I disagree with your characterization that he has betrayed his oath or that I've betrayed mine.
Mr. Jordan suggested that the president did something none of us expected by releasing that call transcript.
One thing they didn't count on was the president releasing the call transcript and letting us all see what he said.
You listened to the call, is that right, Lieutenant Colonel? That is. Miss Williams, you also listened to the call, is that right?
Yes.
Fair to say, Miss Williams, a lot of other people at the White House listened to the call or read the transcript?
I can't characterize how many. I believe there were five or six of us in the listening room at the time.
And the transcript was distributed to others, is that right?
I wasn't part of that process, but that's my understanding.
So the president is asking for us and his defenders to give him a gold star because a number of people listened to the call or saw the call transcript and then he released it. The difference, of course, between this and, say, his one-on-one meeting in Helsinki with Vladimir Putin was it was a one-on-one meeting, and he took the notes from the interpreter, so none of us could see it. The point being, the president had no choice but to release a call that everyone had seen. Now, you've been asked to also characterize what exactly legally all of this means. And Mr. Ratcliffe pointed out that no one had used the term bribery in our depositions.
I've word searched each of your transcripts, and the word bribery or bribe doesn't appear anywhere in that. Ms. Williams, you've never used the word bribery or bribe to explain President Trump's conduct, correct?
No, sir.
Colonel Vindman, you haven't either.
That is correct. And Ms. Williams, you're not a lawyer, are you?
I'm not, no.
Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, are you a lawyer?
The lawyer's back there.
The lawyer's your brother, right? Now, I want to give you a hypothetical here. Suppose you have a shooting victim, and the police respond after the victim is doing a little bit better, and they ask the victim, well, tell us what happened. And the victim says, well, someone came up to my car, shot into the car, hit me in the shoulder, hit me in the back, hit me in the neck. Miraculously, I survived, but I can identify, who the person is that pulled the trigger. The police say, okay, you were shot, you know who it is, but shucks, you didn't tell us that this was an attempted murder, so we're gonna have to let the person go. Is that how it works in our justice system, that unless victims or witnesses identify the legal theories of a case, we just let people off the hook? Is that how it works, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman?
I'm not an attorney, but it doesn't seem so.
I don't think your brother would think so either.
Those of us who sit up here are supposed to be dispassionate and judicial and measured, but I'm angry. And I've been angry since I learned about your summary and unexplained dismissal after a lifetime of excellent and faithful service to this country. I'm angry that a woman whose family fled communism and Nazism, who served this country beautifully for 33 years, not in Paris or in Rome, but literally under fire in places like Mogadishu and Kyiv. I'm angry that a woman like you would be not just dismissed, but humiliated and attacked by the President of the United States. And I'm not just angry for you, I'm angry for every single Foreign Service officer, for every single military officer, for every intelligence officer who right now might believe that a lifetime of service and sacrifice and excellence might be ignored by the President of the United States, or worse yet, attacked in language that would embarrass a mob boss.
I'm angry, like my friend from Connecticut. In fact, I'm very angry about how it is the most powerful person on the face of the earth would remove you from office after your stellar service and somehow feel compelled to characterize you as bad news and then to ominously threaten that you're going to go through some things. So I am angry. But I'm not surprised. After all, as was suggested earlier, he said the whistleblower may have committed treason, a crime punishable by death, even though the whistleblower strictly adhered to the letter of the law as independently attested to by both the Trump-appointed Inspector General and the acting DNI. After all, he even demeaned the memory of Senator McCain after he lied in his grave at the Naval Academy grounds, despite a lifetime of public service and serving 6 years as a prisoner of war in a tiny cell in Hanoi, being beaten and tortured every day. And after all, he belittled the Gold Star Khan family, whose son, Captain Khan, gave his last full measure of devotion out of love for this country. And let me tell you, as somebody whose older brother never saw his 35th birthday because of service in the Vietnam War, those words are deeply offensive. Words matter, and the words leveled against you constitute bullying of the worst order. Your good character, your outstanding reputation have been besmirched in a way that is devoid of common decency. But here's my message to you. There is nothing, Ambassador Ivanovich, nothing he can say or do, not a thing, that will in any way diminish the nature and quality of the service you have rendered to our great nation. Not a thing. And there is not a thing he can say or do that will diminish our gratitude to you for that service. And I thank you again for it.
The question now is on Article 1 of the resolution, impeaching President Donald J. Trump for abusing his powers. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Collins?
No.
Mr. Collins votes no. Mr. Sensenbrenner?
No.
Mr. Sensenbrenner votes no. Mr. Shabbat?
No.
Mr. Shabbat votes no. Mr. Gomert?
My vote is no.
Mr. Gomert votes no. Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Buck?
No.
Mr. Buck votes no. Mr. Radcliffe? Mr. Radcliffe votes no. Ms. Roby? Ms. Roby votes no. Mr. Gates?
No.
Mr. Gates votes no. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana?
No.
Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes no. Mr. Biggs?
No.
Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock?
No.
Mr. McClintock votes no. Ms. Lesko?
No.
Ms. Lesko votes no. Mr. Reschenthaler?
No.
Mr. Reschenthaler votes no. Mr. Klein?
No.
Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong?
No.
Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Stubbe?
No.
Mr. Stubbe votes no.
Has every member voted who wishes to vote?
Mr. Chairman, may I ask how I'm recorded?
How is the gentleman recorded?
Mr. Gomert, you are recorded as no.
Yeah, I want to make sure.
The question now is on Article 2 of the resolution, impeaching President Donald J. Trump for obstructing Congress. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Collins?
No.
Mr. Collins votes no. Mr. Sensenbrenner?
No.
Mr. Sensenbrenner votes no. Mr. Shabbat? Mr. Shabbat votes no. Mr. Gomert?
No.
Mr. Gomert votes no. Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Buck? Mr. Buck votes no. Mr. Radcliffe? Mr. Radcliffe votes no. Ms. Roby? Ms. Roby votes no. Mr. Gates?
No.
Mr. Gates votes no. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana?
No.
Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes no. Mr. Biggs?
No.
Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock?
No.
Mr. McClintock votes no. Ms. Lesko?
No.
Ms. Lesko votes no. Mr. Reschenthaler?
No.
Mr. Reschenthaler votes no. Mr. Klein?
No.
Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong?
No.
Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Stubbe?
No.
Mr. Stubbe votes no.
The article is agreed to. The resolution is amended as ordered, reported favorably to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. The resolution will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of
Now the president in real time is attacking you. What effect do you think that has on other witnesses' willingness to come forward and expose wrongdoing?
Well, it's very intimidating.
Mr. Ivanovich, as we sit here testifying, the president is attacking you on Twitter, and I'd like to give you a chance to respond. I'll read part of one of his tweets. Everywhere Marie Ivanovich went turned bad. She started off in Somalia. How did that go? He goes on to say later in the tweet, is a U.S. president's absolute right to appoint ambassadors. First of all, Ambassador Ivanovich, the Senate has a chance to confirm or deny an ambassador, do they not?
Yes, advise and consent.
But would you like to respond to the president's attack that everywhere you went turned bad?
Well, I don't think I have such powers, not in Mogadishu, Somalia, and not in other places. I actually think that where I've served over the years, I and others have demonstrably made things better, for the U.S. as well as for the countries that I've served in. Ukraine, for example, where there are huge challenges, including, on the issue that we're discussing today of corruption, huge challenges. But they've made a lot of progress since 2014, including in the years that I was there. And I think in part, the Ukrainian people get the most credit for that. But a part of that credit goes to the work of the United States and to me as the ambassador in Ukraine.
Ambassador, you've shown the courage to come forward today and testify. Notwithstanding the fact you were urged by the White House or State Department not to, notwithstanding the fact that, as you testified earlier, the president implicitly threatened you in that call record, and now the president in real time is attacking you. What effect do you think that has on other witnesses' willingness to come forward and expose wrongdoing?
Well, it's very intimidating.
It's designed to intimidate, is it not?
I can't speak to what the president is trying to do, but I think the effect is to be intimidating.
Well, I want to let you know, Ambassador, that some of us here take witness intimidation very, very seriously. Mr. Goldman.
Well, it's very intimidating.
You know where this started? It started with tears in Brooklyn in November 2016, when an election was lost. So we are here, no plan, no fact witnesses, simply being a rubber stamp for what we have. But hey, we got law professors here. What a start of a party.
When you talk about how liberals want to be around each other and cluster, and conservatives don't want to be around each other, and so they have to spread out, it makes people, you may not see this from, like the ivory towers of your law school, but it makes actual people in this country feel like, excuse me, you don't get to interrupt me on this time. Now, let me also suggest that when you invoke the president's son's name here, when you try to make a little joke out of referencing Barron Trump, that does not lend credibility to your argument. It makes you look mean. It makes you look like you're attacking someone's family, the minor child of the President of the United States.
It's just past 5 o'clock, and a lot of families are just getting home from work right now. They're turning on the TV, and they're wondering what they're watching on TV. They're asking themselves, is this a rerun? Because I thought I saw this a couple of weeks ago. But no, this is not a rerun, unfortunately. This is Act 2 of the 3-part tragedy, the impeachment of President Trump.
This is the coldest hearing room in the world. And also, for those of you who are worried about I'm uncomfortable, upset, I'm happy as a lawyer, but this chair is terrible.
Being critical of lack of self-doubt and an overwhelming arrogance on the part of law professors who come in and opine on impeachment. That is what has been on display in this committee today. And with that, I yield back.
We're not having a factual hearing until we have these people that are at the bottom of every fact of this investigation.
Gentlemen,
I yield back. Thanks for bringing down the gavel, Hart. That was nice.
Just with a show of hands, how many on the panel actually voted for Donald Trump in 2016?
I don't think we're obligated to say anything about how we cast our ballots.
Just show of hands.
I will not.
I think you've made your positions, Professor Carlin, very, very clear.
The gentleman will suspend the clock too.
I have a right to cast a ballot.
Mr. Chairman, when can we anticipate that you will choose a date for the minority day of hearings? Mr. Chairman, I'm asking you a question. When can we anticipate that you will choose a date for the minority day of hearings?
The gentleman is recognized for the purpose of questioning the witnesses, not for colloquy with colleagues.
We may have a new hearing room, we may have new mics, and we may have chairs that aren't comfortable.
If wiretapping a political opponent's an impeachable offense, I look forward to reading that Inspector General's report, because maybe it's a different president we should be impeaching.
Gentleman's time has expired, Mr. Cicilline.
I am trying to give a pretty clear signal. I have made up my mind. I'm not
I
trying
wasn't
to
in any
pretend to
doubt
be
at this
a
point,
fair
really.
juror here.
Some people have said, I won't vote for impeachment. Some House members have said, I will not vote for an impeachment. Let me tell you, please don't say that until you understand what you're voting on. Members of the Senate have said, I understand everything there is about this case, and I won't vote to impeach the president. Please allow the facts to do the talking. Nobody knows whether the president, what the articles of impeachment are. People have made up their mind in a political fashion that will hurt this country long term. Do justice to the case. Don't decide the case before the case is in. And this bothers me greatly.
I want this to end as quick as possible for the good of the Senate, for the good of the country. And I think the best thing for America to do is get this behind us. If you don't like President Trump, you can vote against him in less than a year. It's not like a politician is unaccountable if you don't impeach him. So I think impeachment is going to end quickly in the Senate. I would prefer it to end as quickly as possible. Use the record that was assembled in the House to pass impeachment articles as your trial record. I don't want to call anybody. I don't need to hear from Hunter Biden. I don't need to hear from Joe Biden. We can deal with that outside of impeachment. I don't want to talk to Pompeo. I don't want to talk to Pence. I want to hear the House make their case based on the record they established in the House, and I want to vote.
The Senate has a constitutional duty in holding this trial and comprehensively evaluating the case. Agree?
No, it doesn't say that in the Constitution. It says that the Senate will dispose. I am trying to give a pretty clear signal. I have made up my mind. I'm not trying to pretend to be a fair juror here. I'm telling you right now, if Mueller had found something against Trump, I'd have been his loudest critic, and I told the president to his face. So what I see happening today is just a partisan nonsense.
You have voiced strong opinions about this impeachment case, but you are, along with the rest of your Senate fellows, jurors. Is it appropriate to be voicing your opinion even before this gets to the Senate as a trial?
Well, I must think so, because I'm doing it.
Please don't say that until you understand what you're voting on. Please allow the facts to do the talking. Do justice to the case. Don't decide the case before the case is in. And this bothers me greatly.